Dr. Richard Asante is a senior research fellow and lecturer in the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana in Legon, and he holds a sort of like a dual PhD in political science under the Harvard University and the University of Ghana split PhD program. And he previously served as the head of the department and research coordinator of the History and Politics Unit of the Institute of African Studies from August 2014 to July 2016. And he has special research interests in religion and politics, social capital, and African development. And he was a resident scholar in international relations at Pomona College in Claremont, California during the 2016 and 2017 academic year. And he previously served as a visiting scholar at the New School University in New York in 2006, Oxford University in the UK in 2005, and Northwestern University from 2012 to 2013, where I met him. So in this talk today, Asante examines the role of the Christian faith in electoral politics in Ghana and also right here in the US during the 2016 elections. And he will present his preliminary findings and ongoing research project on the religion and the electoral politics and sort of how the Christian faith sort of impacted things on the grassroots level and also at the national level. And he demonstrates that despite the separation of religion from the state, religion still played an important role in the 2016 elections. And he concludes, as all research papers should conclude, by looking at the implications of the future of democracy in Ghana and in the US. So please welcome me and welcoming Dr.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to you all, and especially to Jacqueline for bringing me over to this beautiful campus. I have enjoyed, the weather here is so beautiful, and you also have great and, very beautiful campus. So I've enjoyed, my stay so far, and I hope to learn more about this university. For this afternoon's talk, just want to focus on the role of religion in politics. And as a political scientist, I know very well that, it's not an area that, political scientists tended to focus on until, latter part of the 1990s, because the assumption is that, we should leave religion and politics to, religious studies people to do. But the trend is changing more recently. The motivation actually for doing this kind of research is that over the years, since 2004, 2008, 2012, and 2016, I always find myself during the election season in the US. So in 2004, I was in New York at the New School University. In 2008, I was at Harvard. In 2012, I was at Northwestern in Chicago. And then 2016, I was at Pomona, California. So it was also an election season. Coincidentally, Ghanaians also hold their election every 4 years, like the US. So the US, hold their elections in November, and Ghana, December, the same year. And I have always been interested, in trying to understand American politics as somebody who also dabbles in comparative politics. That is precisely what I do. And in the previous visit, I was never curious, to studying more systematically about, American politics. But in 2016, I felt, that election was extraordinary. I've never witnessed anything of that sort. So I decided to be a bit curious to try to understand what was happening. But at the same time, although I mostly find myself in the US, I always also get interested in politics in Ghana. And so in 2012, for example, though I was at Northwestern, I wrote a paper which was commissioned by the Journal of African Election and attracted considerable, publicity. So, though I've been here, but I also struggle, back home and try to understand, what is happening. So basically, in terms of the methods that I've been doing was that I was based in Claremont in California, in Pomona College, and I participated, fully in the election by doing interviews with scholars, with politicians. Also, during the voting day, I went around visiting polling stations, held, interview with election officials. They were so generous, with ordinary voters. I participated in a lot of their post-election events, the protest movement and so on and so forth. And at Pomona College, after the election, it was very difficult for students. So students embark on protests of all sorts, so I also participated and observed. I also traveled to Dayton in Ohio, visited some rural areas in Ohio, did some interview, which was extremely fascinating because I've always been based in the big cities, hardly knew what actually goes on during election and what motivates rural voters, during elections. So it was very fascinating to be in rural Ohio to, talk to people to see how they also see elections. And then, of course, I've been following the print and the electronic media consistently, both CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and the rest, and so not the fake ones. I know in America, fake news is a big one, but I followed all of them systematically to see how they covered the election. So basically, the topic will be the role of religion in electoral politics. What I'm doing is just preliminary because the study is very much ongoing. And so the map here is the beautiful map of Ghana, red, gold, green with a black star, and then the map of mighty America. One thing that interests me as an African is that whenever we meet at football, soccer, you guys call it soccer, the World Cup, we normally will have to beat US, but whenever US beats us, then it's very sad, So Ghanaians love Americans, but when it comes to soccer, no, they want to beat Americans. But now the Americans have revenge. World Cup, we've beaten you guys twice, you've beaten us once, and then the under-17 World Cup recently, you beat us, which was, very sad, for many Ghanaians. Okay, so this is how I want to, this just a brief presentation. What makes America great? So basically, it's about what makes American democracy great, because that is what Americans want the rest of the world to know. That look, our democracy is near perfect, and it's great, and it's beautiful. Some myths about political behavior, and then religion and politics in Ghana, and of course the U.S., specifically looking at the role of religion in the 2016 election in Ghana and America, and some few lessons. When I was studying at the New School, I took a course on American constitutionalism, and that course was really fascinating. And I recall with pride memory when we learned about the famous, debate around the Constitutional Convention of 1787, when the American constitutional experts had met behind closed doors, thinking through the path that America should choose. Should they go as a republic or as a monarch? And when the meeting was over, many Americans were curious, hanging around the meeting, which was, behind closed doors. So Benjamin Franklin was approached by, one of the curious ladies hanging around that, look, what is the outcome of the meeting? Is it a republic or a monarch? And then Benjamin Franklin responded that a republic, if only you can keep it. This is really significant because over the years, Americans have changed the notion of republic to democracy. So it's becoming more like democracy if you can keep it. That is very powerful because it assumes that democracy is not given, right? It's not, it's not something that can be operated under autopilot. It is something that has to be nurtured. It is something that has to be maintained and sustained. And so how have Americans, done this over the years in which they claim that their democracy is near perfect? There is a way that Americans boast of their democracy, right? And what became famously as American exceptionalism, when in 1735, a famous French aristocrat by name Alexis de Tocqueville visited the United States of America. He was fascinated by what he claimed to be American exceptionalism in ways in which Americans easily associate with each other, have a strong sense of community, how they easily join associations and learn a lot within association. He never saw that in his native France nor in Europe. So basically, over the years, we've been told that what is driving Americans' democracy and development is a strong sense of community, which is referred to as social capital. But in 1995 and 2000, Robert Putnam, who was my professor at Harvard, wrote a very famous book called Bowling Alone, in which he stated that Americans have lost their sense of community. That sense of, trust, cooperation, reciprocity, which is called social capital, which has been, driving American democracy, was fast disappearing. Why? The answer is simple. Americans no longer want to join associations. And one of the most prominent associations happens to be the church or religious, organizations. Putnam and other scholars claim that Americans join associations, including the church, and they learn a lot by going to church over and over again. They learn to trust each other. They learn to build a sense of community. They learn, norms of reciprocity, cooperation, and so on and so forth. What they learn in church, they also translate it into politics. So in politics, Americans were more tolerant of each other, willing to cooperate with each other. Then also there is a very strong sense that those who go to church, tend to have various values, including willingness to cooperate with others to face community problems, more altruistic, helping in community development, and so on and so forth. So the church has always been central in American politics. And Americans in the 60s and 70s, according to Putnam, loved to go to church. And they were not just people who sat at home or were paying checks, and dues and so on. They actively participated in church. So the church has been one of important establishment or organizations where social capital or strong sense of community is developed. When people stop going to church, as what is being alleged to be happening in America in recent times, then it negatively impacts on American democracy. So for social capital scholars, part of the reason why American democracy is not doing so well is precisely because people are no longer actively associating with each other. In terms of general behavior of voters within Africa, Western scholars particularly have a way of seeing the average African voter. It's assumed that the African voter votes per tribe, per his religion, and personality. They are not people who vote on issues like abortion, on issues like the economy, on trade, and so on and so forth. And so African democracy is always weak, and even they are unable to even organize successful election. And so, in short, there is a way that people see the African voter when the person goes to cast his or her vote. So basically, this is the map of Ghana and the United States. So this is the African map. Ghana is in West Africa, so it's located somewhere here. This map precisely is West African map. And then up there we have the mighty America. Now, the critical question is, why do you want to focus on Ghana and America? America has had democracy for close to 300 years. And it's a great country, it's huge, economically well developed. Ghana, inconsistently, with democracy started in the 60s, couldn't maintain democracy, fell into military and authoritarian hands, and so on and so forth, and then became part of the third wave of democratization. So Ghana restored its democracy, only in the 1990s. Economically, it's very weak, and so how do you want to compare these two countries? Is it not comparing apple and oranges? I would say no, but basically there is a lot of similarities. One has to do with the fact that both Ghana and the US were former British colonies, and that is very significant. Ghana and US have had long shared values with respect to promoting human rights and democracy. Then again, consistently, we have had very strong interaction between Ghana and the US at the national level. It will amaze you because it has not happened in Africa. So in 1998, President Bill Clinton and Hillary, down here, visited Ghana. At that time it was under Jerry Rawlings, so that was 1998. Not too long after that, from 98, then in 2008, we have President George Bush visiting Ghana. And within 1 year, President Barack Obama also visited Ghana. This is historic because within 2 years, we have within 1 year, we have two American presidents visiting Ghana. That hasn't happened in Africa before, And part of the reason why these American presidents visited Ghana precisely was because they saw Ghana as a model of democracy with a very strong democratic credentials. Can you imagine that President Obama, we all know part of his come from Kenya, and one would have thought that, coming into office, his first African trip will be Kenya. But he said, no, I'm going to go to Ghana because there is something great, happening in Ghana, precisely because of the country's democratic credentials. So there has been very strong diplomatic relationship between Ghana and the U.S. And of course, some Ghanaian nationals, the U.S. have succeeded in convincing them to nationalize to play for the U.S. national team. But apart from that, also, one other similarity is the fact that when it comes to political parties, in Ghana, just like U.S., is dominated by two parties, although we have smaller parties. So in the U.S., it's Democrat, Republicans. In Ghana, it's about the New Patriotic Party, which is the current party, and of course, the National Democratic Congress. So over the years, Ghana has, developed into a two-party state, which those who do political science will say that, any country that has developed that is a very strong democracy, Then, of course, the 2016 election was historic. So here you have, then candidate Trump, very flamboyant, rich business guy with no political experience, competing with Hillary Clinton, who is more like a political establishment candidate, and also the first female. That was really, really very historic election. In the case of Ghana, we have the incumbent who lost the election as well, John Dramani Mahama, going for his second term of office against the opposition candidate who had contested and lost for 3 times. If the guy who is now 72 lost the 2016 election, he would have been doomed. So he had to, make sure that for his third bid, he succeeds. And so, but despite the similarities, there are also some few differences because in the US, you use the electoral system, electoral college system, which is, a very controversial one, but Ghana uses the first past the vote system. So this is what happened in 2016. On top here, you find, the flamboyant but incredibly unrestrained Donald Trump, out there, and then you find what he called the crooked Hillary, also down here. And in Ghana, this is John Dramani Mahama. He was then the incumbent who was going for his second term. And that was significant because in Ghana, they are usually given 2 terms. So you finish your first term, then you do the second term. And just like the US, mostly the same president will be given approval for the second term. But it didn't happen. This is the opposition guy, Nana Akufo-Addo, a very respected politician, veteran, together with his 2 daughters. And so this is how the election looked like. This guy looks like relatively younger, pretending to be Hussein Bolt, that he was going to steal the election so easily, but in the end, it didn't happen that way. Then again, one similarities is the competitive nature of primaries. So just like in the US, so you have the Republican GOP primaries, you have Marco Rubio, Trump, Ted Cruz, and others competing for the GOP ticket. Eventually, the flamboyant man got the nod. Here also you see Hillary with Bernie Sanders and and others. And in the end, she got the nod. In Ghana also, very, very competitive primaries. And at the end of the day, only one person will get the nod to represent the parties. Now, can you imagine this chart that I have here? Is it by mere coincidence or there is something fundamentally kicking in? Anytime you find the Republicans in power, in Ghana, you will find the National Democratic Congress also in power. And anytime you have the Republicans in power, you have the NPP, also in power. That has been consistent. 92 to 2000, it was President Clinton. He was a Democrat. And in Ghana, it was Jerry Rawlings who was with the NDC. Then there was a change. In 2001 to 2008, President Bush, Republican, got elected. And then in Ghana, it was the NPP that also got elected. Then in 2009, there was change. In the US, Obama was elected, Republican replacing a Democrat replacing a Republican. And in Ghana also, the NDC won. And then in 2017, the same story has been repeated. Trump, Republican, Ghana, also NPP. So that has been the trend. Now, what is interesting about these two parties is that, Democrats are more leftist, right? And in Ghana also, the NDC claim to be leftist. They practice social democracy, right? Although the idea of ideology is very, very tricky in Ghana. Because in the US, when we say somebody is Republican, right, it means he's more conservative. If somebody is a Democrat, it means the person is more liberal. But in Ghana, you don't have that. Because what happened is that the NPP, who is supposed to be capitalist and conservative, when it comes to the economic policies, they tend to introduce more social protection policies, more leftist policies than even the NDC. So the idea of ideology is very tricky in Ghana. It's more stronger in the US than in Ghana. But basically, that is the trend. Whenever Republicans are in power in the US, in Ghana, it is the NPP who are also the capitalists and conservative. Whenever there is a Democrat in power in Ghana, it is the NDC who are the leftists, and then, they claim to be liberal. I don't know why the picture is always like that. Why is it that in America every 8 years they want to change, and Ghana also every 8 years they want to make a change? Is it mere coincidence, or is something that is, destined to happen? So, and then also, do you know that in Ghana, the MPP, that is more Republican, shares the same symbol with the Republican Party? They all use elephants. So those are some of the coincidences. So basically, this is the background to the comparative study of Ghana and and the US. Clearly, there are a lot of similarities that so it makes a lot of sense to begin to do that kind of study. In terms of religion, this is how the religious map looks like in Ghana. So Ghana is a secular state. It's not a big country, just approximately 26 million people. As I said, formerly British colony. But in terms of religion, this is how it looks like. Christians are about 71% of the population, right? And then we have Muslims, around 70%, and then African traditional religion, 5.2%. And there are people who also claim that they don't belong to any religious faith. That is around 5.3%. But also, do you know that in the global religiosity index, which is usually compiled by the Pew Research, do you know Ghana emerged as the most religious country in the world? That is 3 years ago. So the whole world, Ghana emerged as the most religious country in the world. And so that is really significant, and we'll be interested to know how that actually impacts on Ghanaian politics. But in terms of Christian churches, there are many churches in Ghana. We have those that we call the Orthodox churches. So when we say Orthodox, you're talking about the Presbyterians, you're talking about the Methodists, you're talking about Baptists, and so on and so forth. And then also we have the Catholics, and basically their apex organization is the Ghana Catholic Bishop Conference. Very, very, very powerful. So when you talk about the Catholic Church, they have an apex organization, and then also the mainstream Protestant, also they have their apex organization. All of them come under what we call the Christian Council of Ghana, which was formed in 1929, representing all the Orthodox churches, Baptist, Presbyterian, and so on and so forth. And then of course we have what we call the Neo-Pentecostal and the Charismatic churches. These are the fastest growing churches in Ghana. And in the US, it's equivalent to the evangelical churches here. You guys call it evangelical. Very, very fast growing, made up of young people believe in prophecy, drums a lot, and very lively worship, and so on and so forth. That's the fastest growing church in Ghana. They also have an apex organization called the Ghana Pentecostal Council. So really, this is how the religious scene in Ghana looks like. But in Ghana's political history, basically you can talk about three major phases: the colonial era, and then the era of authoritarian rule, and democratic transition and consolidation. In these three major phases, religious organizations, particularly the churches, have played instrumental role. Now, colonialism created its own demise in Ghana. Why? Because, the churches, Protestant movement, were very much central part of the colonial establishment. They came in, as missionaries, built schools and colleges across Ghana. Because the British colonial empire itself was never interested in education. It was rather the missionaries who created school and educated the ordinary, Ghanaian about Western values, and so on and so forth. And so at the time that the struggle for independence was at its peak, it is these guys, Ghanaians, who have gone to the mission schools and became the educated elite or the intelligentsia. They led the struggle against British imperialism. So the church has, right from colonial era, been central part of the struggle against colonialism. Now, we've transitioned to post-colonial era, and the military intervened in politics. There also, it was these same churches in Ghana who collectively came together and then fought that the country should be returned to democracy. And then also in the democratic transition consolidation era, the churches have become like, watchdogs, trying to make sure that democracy is consolidated. We don't go back to the era of military rule, and so on and so forth. So the churches have always been very, very instrumental. The question then is it all the churches that are very active in playing that guardian role? I would say no. No, because there are two major divides. As I indicated, you have the Orthodox churches and then the Neo-Pentecostal and the Charismatic. The equivalent here is the Evangelicals. For the Orthodox churches, the Presbyterian, Methodist, Baptist, they have always been part of the country's politics right from colonial rule. And they believe that they are the guardians of Ghana's democracy and politics, and they must make sure that politicians do the right thing. So they actively intervene in politics whenever the need arises. But the charismatic and neo-Pentecostal, the evangelicals, they tend to shy away from politics. According to them, politics is a dirty game, and that there is a straight separation between church or religion and politics. And so let's leave that dirty game to the politicians. There is nothing you can do about them, so that we don't soil ourselves with the dirt and all those things. So they shy away. But interestingly, there has been a shift in that kind of political theology. In modern day Ghana, there has been a shift because whether you are neo-charismatic, neo-Pentecostal, you also recognize that there is the need to be active in politics. And that is driven by Proverbs 29, chapter 2. The good book says that when the righteous is in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked is in authority, the people mourn. And so increasingly, the political theology is shifting in Ghana today. It's shifting because whether you are, Orthodox or evangelical, you still believe that religion and politics are inseparable. 2, it's all about good citizenship and Christian virtues. They are two sides of the same coin. So you can't claim to be a good Christian and not be a good citizen. And to be a good citizen, it also means that you have to learn Christian virtues because you can't separate each other from them. But ultimately also, Ghana can only enjoy development in freedom if it elects a God-fearing leader. So when there is election, everybody out there as a candidate will want to present him or herself as a God-fearing good people, because Ghanaians are highly religious people. So if you don't demonstrate that you have good virtues, that you won't steal people's money when you get a nod, you won't abuse their power, then forget about it. And so almost everybody comes in and try to present him or herself as highly religious. So what do the churches actually do during electoral politics and of course during elections? So they use the pulpits. They speak against the ills of society. They speak against crime, corruption, social abuses, and so on and so forth. They also write memoranda and letters. They write and circulate them and give copies to the politicians. They sometimes will make a request that want to meet the politicians and the president and so on and so forth to discuss pressing national issues. Or they are not happy about the way the campaign is being run. And so they want to meet all the political parties to let them know that they need to be doing something better. But in the past, that was very significant because the various churches also tended to have their own newspapers. And that was really very powerful. So the Presbyterian churches, used to have what we call the Christian Messenger. That had very wide circulation. And they write so well, and people go to buy those papers and read it. The same thing, the Catholic Church, they had what we call the Catholic Standard, well written. Courageously, they will, deal with pressing national issue. And the Methodists also tended to have what we call the Methodist. So the churches never sat, aloof and allowed the politicians to do their own stuff. They found their own space and they tried to influence politics. But of course, they were also very instrumental in promoting reconciliation and forgiveness before, during, and after elections. And then they will also organize themselves, actively involved in election observation and monitoring to make sure that election passes on very well. In the U.S., so from what I've gathered so far, of course, there is separation of church and politics, But what actually happened in 2016 was significantly not different from what also goes on or what happening in Ghana. So we saw Franklin Graham, the son of the legendary Billy Graham, well-respected evangelist. He embarked on a nationwide campaign in the U.S., visited all the 54 states in what he called the Campaign for God. He visited all the 54 states in America. And his message was very simple. Our country is in a moral decay, and therefore urged Americans to get out, Christians to get out and vote in 2016. But that was a very, very unique and powerful platform that he created as he visited each state, to the others. And then, of course, I would argue that candidate Trump was very smart to have tapped into that unique platform that Graham had and others had created. He went ahead to pick far-right evangelical Mike Pence for vice president. Then, of course, he had an evangelical advisory team that consistently, was advising him about religious matters and how he could appeal to the various religious groups. Significantly, he held a closed-door meeting with over 900 evangelical leaders in New York. That meeting was held behind closed doors. And then, of course, when this whole sex tape became such a big issue, one of the groups, organized religious group, that jumped to his defense was the evangelicals. Of course, there were a bit of, division at that point where the female evangelicals wanted to disown him because they felt that the attitude and the report about the sex tape was really something horrible. And so but tele-evangelicals came in and defended him, that he's changed and then he's going to be a better person, so Americans should forgive him and move on. What was also significant was that on the eve of the election, Franklin Graham, who had toured the whole country and had initially indicated to Americans that he was not campaigning for either Democrats or Republicans, in the end took sides and said, he specifically made appeal to millennials and said, hold your nose and vote Donald Trump. That was after the sex tape. He said, hold your nose and vote for him because he has changed. And after all, God has forgiven him for all that happened. The question then was, what about Hillary? In the case of Hillary, the destiny was that, God can never forgive her for the leakage, the emails, and all the, accusations that have been. For her, God will never forgive her. Why? Because she supports abortion. And also the leakage of the emails was such that, God will never forgive her. These were the same people who said, forgive this man, but for the others. So I didn't know that God was so selective that he would turn a blind eye on one. But that was very, very powerful. But at the same time, at that time, where were the Orthodox people, given that Hillary was a Methodist, right? But well, for many, based on my interview, many Orthodox, Methodist, Presbyterian, they felt religion was something personal and was not something to, be actively discussed within the political realm. But then again, on November 7th, that was where the legendary Billy Graham, celebrated his 98th birthday. Then again, candidate Trump tapped into that. And he said some nice and beautiful things about how when he was growing as a young person, his dad took him to Billy Graham crusades. And so he was telling evangelicals that, look, I'm one of you, because right from my childhood, I'd always been part of that movement. My dad was there. I also attended some of those crusades and so on and so forth. But no less a person than Cissy Graham Lynch, who is the daughter of Billy Graham, was on that same platform, explicitly made appeal that Americans, evangelicals in particular, should vote for Donald Trump and not Hillary. So really, that platform became, very much, of Trump campaign. Now, when you proceed and also systematically observe cases about the Supreme Court issue and so on and so forth, from the interview that I have done, many people said they voted for candidate Trump, not because he was an excellent candidate, but precisely because of the Supreme Court issue. That for Democrats since 1953, they have never had the chance to appoint a Chief Justice since 1953. Democrats have never had the opportunity to nominate majority, hold majority in the Supreme Court since 1972. So the Supreme Court issue became so central. And as of November 2016, it was 4-4 after the late judge passed away. So you have 4 conservative and 4 liberals. 2016 election, they had to fight, because whoever won was then going to have the opportunity to make an appointment to the Supreme Court, making it 5-4. So the Supreme Court issue was so central. And from conservative Republican view, Judge Merrick Garland, who President Obama had nominated, was not good enough because he was a liberal. And should a liberal go to the Supreme Court, making it 5-4, then it will tilt the balance, and they will be able to make a lot of laws, including laws that will have implications for religion. And so many people say, well, we were also concerned about the Supreme Court, and therefore we wanted to block it in such a way that, a conservative will be there. Then, of course, the anti-abortion and amendment to second right, and then overturn Roe and Wade, which deals with women's right to abortion and so on and so forth. So these were matters that were of extreme religious significance to many conservative and evangelical Christians, that they were, influenced to giving their vote to Trump. Of course, Trump had also promised that he had 21 potential Supreme Court nominees, all conservative, who will make sure that the Supreme Court will not pass any law that will infringe on religious and Christian rights. So basically, what are some of the lessons that I've learned so far about Ghana and America and the role of religion? That religion plays a very powerful role because it provides very strong and powerful platform for politicians to send their message. So, for example, in Ghana, you find 96% of the population, you find them in the church or in the mosque. And so that platform is one of the, unique way that you can use to advertise your message. And in the same vein, that is what candidate Trump did. He used organized religious movement, including the evangelical, to market his campaign and his project. That Trump formed a powerful partnership with the evangelical Christian leaders in ways that the Orthodox people didn't do that for Hillary as a Methodist. That religion also played, a very important role. If you consider the presidential inauguration, not only do they ask for God should help me, but also all the events, they are separate, religious prayers, that are being said, and then of course the Bible, the famous Bible by the 16th President of the United States, the Lincoln Bible, has become so powerful. President Obama used it, and then of course President Trump also, many others have also used the same one. And then also during campaign, you saw President Bush, in '89, copiously making references to the scripture. And then we saw Barack Obama also in 2008 copiously made references, quoted scripture. And then we saw Trump also, do same. So religion has always been, despite the fact that religion plays a central role, what is significant about 2016 election, that is in Ghana and America, democracy is so fragile. I saw what happened after the election. My students simply boycotted class. They wouldn't show up, they wouldn't talk, they wouldn't do so many people, saw a lot of protests and so on and so forth in America. Back in Ghana also the same thing. Losers usually very sad, and then but then of course issues of identity, race and religion are all things that matters. So contrary to the assertion that among Africans they are less sophisticated, they only vote based on religion, personality and race. In the US, I would also conclude that it's not quite different, because race matters in election, religion also matters, and also personality also matters. I would conclude by giving this famous quote by President Barack Obama. When people usually, become a bit more curious when Americans, criticize African democracy and democracy in other parts of the world. And he said, our American democracy is not perfect. We've worked for many years, but one thing we do is we continually re-examine to figure out how we can make our democracy better. And that is a force of strength for us, being willing to look and see honestly what we need to be doing to fulfill the promise of our founding document. So contrary to the assertion that, American democracy is perfect, no, according to President Obama, it is still very fragile. It has its own weaknesses, but then the good thing is that Americans will always continue to work to make their democracy better. So basically, this is all that I have to share with you, and I will be happy to get questions and comments from you. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. And before we field the questions, I also wanted to add that for the last Ghanaian election, the vice president is a former Baylor professor. So those ties continue on, and I've tried to get contacts and connections, but he hasn't responded to my phone calls.
When I go back,
connections are still there.
I will charge him to
have a talk with
yes,
him.
He's a very relatively young professor from this.
And he was here between 2008 and 2002, I think, at Baylor for any business majors. So we're going to go ahead and field questions and just old-fashioned raise your hand and we will, yes.
Thank you for the talk.
And if you can introduce yourselves.
Terry Kudelia, assistant professor at political science department. Of course, there are important differences in the electoral systems in the United States and Ghana, and you have a two-round system versus a very unique system in America.
Yes.
Could you please discuss how electoral systems affect the use of religion and coalition building before the elections, and how that affect the outcome?
That's excellent question. So this is what happened. In the 1950s, right about, emerging into independence, there was a lot of tensions in Ghana. Because when the British were about to leave, they said they wanted, Ghanaians to form political parties because they will only be willing to hand over to recognized parties and not just call anybody. And then, because there was that debate, in Ghana, chiefs are very influential and very popular. At the height, when it became eminent that the British would be leaving, the chiefs presented themselves as the natural heirs. They are the chiefs of the people and custodians of the land and customs and tradition of the people. So they said, when you are going, we like it, go, give the power to us, But at the same time also, the educated elites, these are guys who were products of mission school, as I've said, and some had come here to the US, some had studied in Oxford, in Harvard, and so they felt that, they should be given that power. But the British say form political parties. So political parties were formed. Unfortunately, some political parties were formed along ethnic and tribal lines. Other political parties were formed along religious lines. So, for example, Muslims formed political party to compete for the election. Some Christians also formed, and there were a lot of, backlash and tensions. So, after independence, our first president, Nkrumah, passed a law, the Avoidance of Discrimination Act of 1958, that barred all political parties and movements formed along ethnic or religious lines. So all those parties that were formed along ethnic and religious lines had to abandon, those unique identities and merge with others. And since 1958, subsequent constitutions and political party bills and laws of Ghana have upheld that view that there are no ethnic parties, there are no religious parties. Nevertheless, parties continue, to play that card in a more subtle manner that you have to be, you have to pay close attention, otherwise you wouldn't recognize it. But to be able to consolidate that clause then laws were made that our electoral system, which is based on first past the vote, or what we call majoritarian principle, in itself has its own advantage and disadvantages. So a majority or first past the vote system means that when we go into election, whoever gets the majority automatically gets elected, right? But Ghana has gone beyond the first past the post system to insert a clause. And the clause is that when it comes to presidential elections, you don't just have to obtain majority, but you need to cross 50% of the mark. Now, this is very significant because you then look at the population structure and the ethnic and religious map of Ghana. In Ghana, the Akan ethnic group, that when we say Akan, it's just a language-speaking group, and there are about 25, different tribes, if I could use the term tribe, that make up the Akan. So there are different people, and they speak the same language. That includes Ashantis, who are in the majority, and then I myself, I'm a Kwawu, I'm an Akan, and then other groups. When you put all of us together as Akans, then we are more than 51% of Ghana's population, right? But because you need to obtain 50 plus, if an Akan candidate decide to only focus on the Akan ethnic groups, I'm sorry, the Akans are in the majority, but you fail woefully. It means that you have to reach out to the other ethnic groups, religious groups, and so on and so forth to get elected. And that is very significant because at the end of the day, when you are able to reach out to other groups, it fosters inclusiveness. And at the end of the day, political appointment, distribution, and development is spread across the country. So that is really significant to have a 50% threshold. And so when we do the election first round and no candidates obtain 50 plus, then we go into the second round. In the second round, only the two dominant parties will contest in the second round. And by that time, they will be able to cross the 50% per one. So if you say, I know these are the majority groups, so I'll concentrate on them, I am sorry, you are not likely to succeed. You have to reach out to so many people, and by doing so, it fosters inclusiveness and national, unity and reconciliation.
Yes. Your name and sort of which department are you in?
So my name is Joseph Webster. I'm
Joseph?
a junior in political science. And I was wondering, why do you think that the evangelical Pentecostal churches in Ghana and like the younger people that are part of those churches, why are they less interested in using religion in politics?
Okay. That's an excellent question. So, one, there are a number of reasons. First, if you look at the Orthodox churches, they have been around since the 15th century because Africans' encounter with Europe, at least, started around the 15th century. And as I indicated, during the era of colonial encounter, we had the missionaries come in. And those missionaries who came in were mostly the Orthodox, Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, and so on and so forth. They created churches, they also established educational institutions, and produced graduates, right, who were very committed to the church. And so right from there, they have been very educated. In terms of the evangelical or charismatic churches, they are fairly recent. They emerged in Ghana in the latter part of 1970s. And when they emerged, right, they had a number of challenges because they were mostly young, people coming out from school. They didn't have the resources. They didn't have the clout like the established churches who had huge endowment, who had very strong connection. For example, the Catholic Church had very strong connection with the Roman Catholic Church. You can't touch the Catholic Church of Ghana because if you touch them, if you're a politician and you touch them, it's like touching the Vatican. So these guys, and they were very educated. Most of the leaders of the Catholic Bishop Conference are mostly professors, very courageous, well-educated, well-informed. But because the evangelicals, only emerged in the 1970s, mostly with young people who were not well endowed, didn't have the capital, didn't have the resources, they felt that they wanted, to start something differently. In any case, who will listen to these young people? People listen to the professors, reverend professor, reverend doctor, those bishop, those were the kind of guys who were there. But today, the trend is changing. As I indicated, they've been around from 1970s up to today. Now, some of those guys who were in their 20s are now around 50s. And the churches have expanded. And then not only that, but in terms of endowment, they are also rich. And then they can also call the shots, And so that is why they have now changed, they have shifted their ideology to say that no, we will no longer sit aside unconcerned. We have many young people. One way to get the young people interested in politics is that we ourselves, should go in and make ourselves very useful. So that is the trend now. So there has been a shift from the old theology to a more dualistic one, where they feel that if you leave everything to the politician in the name that politics is dirty, then you are not likely to achieve more.
And something to add, if you take my modern African history class, is that you're speaking about cultures that are very much age hierarchy.
Yes.
So these evangelical young men in African cultures, your authority comes with age and achieving ideal manhood for men. Getting married and having kids and having dependents and supporting him. So if you're these 18, 19-year-olds that are trying to get power, people are going to laugh at you. Is that they're going to listen to the wise, to the wise men. So.
And then also recently they're able to do more because they have stronger connection. Actually, one of, as I indicated in my presentation, those evangelical, or what we call Pentecostal charismatic, have deep roots and ties in the U.S. So most of the prominent evangelical churches in the U.S., you have them in Ghana. And today also, those smaller evangelical churches in Ghana have branches in the whole world, including North America. In the U.S., it's amazing how you find Ghanaian churches, in the U.S., and they are still pulling the crowd. So they are also benefiting from the advantages that the old churches used to have. Because now if you touch some of the evangelicals, it's like touching the big evangelical churches in the U.S., who also have strong connection in politics and in the White House. So just as you wouldn't, touch the Catholic Church of Ghana because of Vatican or because of, those established institutions, in Ghana today also, the evangelical, if you touch some of them, they have strong ties, with the U.S. Establishment. So it's good news.
I do remember that Ghana was the first big country to win its independence. And it is surrounded by a lot of countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, Liberia,
Togo,
all of them that have really, Nigeria, that have undergone a lot of strife.
Yes.
And with that fight within themselves, civil strife. What do you think has isolated or has insulated you from this? What is the one or two things that are distinctive about Ghana that has kept them apart from all of this strife and experience?
That is an excellent question, and that is a very, very difficult question. I have, for more than a decade, grappled precisely, and many political scientists have also grappled with that question. And many political scientists have not been able to answer that question. But here are my thoughts, and I believe that, it's very strong. Ghana has a unique tradition and history with respect to democratization. Democracy did not start in Ghana in the 1990s. In fact, as far back as the 1940s and 50s, when we were preparing for political independence, Ghana had established political parties and established traditions. And in the 1950s and 60s, Ghana's democracy was vibrant and robust until the military stepped in and kind of like created all those challenges. So today democracy is not new in Ghana. We have had that experience in the 50s and in the 60s. But oftentimes people ignore the historical fact and assumes that, oh, Ghana also started in the 1990s. That is incorrect. And so that is one of the significant things, is that we have a democratic experience, long experience enough, and then the military intervened. Secondly, when the military intervened in our politics, a lot of challenges came up. Human rights abuses, they violated people's rights, they would bar and ban freedom of worship, freedom of association, that a lot of restrictions were imposed on the Ghanaian. So in terms of enjoyment of civil and political rights, there were major constraints. Ghanaians look back today and recognize that our democracy is not perfect. We have a lot of challenges. Nevertheless, this environment is much, much better than living under a military dictator who tells you when to wake up and when to go to bed. And so Ghanaians want to guard, against those military authoritarianism and enjoy the freedom that they have. And that is supported by a number of data. If you look at the Afrobarometer survey data, which is done in about 38 countries in Africa, Ghana consistently has data from 1998, and I've been deeply involved. If you look at the data, you see that Ghanaians recognize that their democracy is not perfect. Nevertheless, they have nostalgic memory of the military, the brutality, the terrible things that they did, and they are saying that, no, we don't want that. We don't want non-democratic system. So basically, those are the... Also linked to the democratic experience is the fact that Ghanaians generally are people who are not that extremely violent and believe in extreme violence. In Ghana, you hardly find that confrontation, open between Christian and Muslim. No. We don't have that kind of system. And now what is also happening is the increasing involvement of religious leaders in the way that politics are done. They are quick to intervene to say this is wrong. They are quick to intervene and say that, because they were also affected by the military dictatorship. They imposed a lot of restrictions on them to the extent that if you want to form a church, you had to go and obtain permission and go and register to be able to observe your freedom, Now all those things are gone. So those are few of the things that I could say is actually helping Ghana to do. The extreme views and those things are usually not there. And reconciliation and forgiveness is also very much part of our culture. And because of the religious belief of many people, when somebody does something terrible, in which somebody will have to shoot the person, among the accounts we say, give it to God, give it to God. Many Americans have told us that is not good enough. We should fight for our right. But among Ghanaians, it's very easy to hear people say, let's give it to God. God will deal with that person. Let's forget about it and move on. So those are some of the few morals and the norms and the conventions that also seem to be working.
Let me just briefly add from Cameroon, where I was born, and when we were doing our struggles for independence, a lot of the leaders who were exiled went to Ghana. And they led their revolutions and nationalist movements in Ghana freely. And so the Cameroon government had to come and pluck them out of Ghana because the Ghanaian government wouldn't give them up. So
the same thing also South Africa. So Nelson Mandela, all the nationalist leaders in Africa were hosted and based in Ghana, where they were trained about how to go back and fight the colonialists and then get their freedoms.
I do know from interacting from Western African countries and people in it, Ghana has a certain, even when you meet them, it's a certain freedom that goes with their personality. Even when they're clothed, they're so bright and they're very lovely. Many times you go through these African countries, you feel this burden almost on people's personalities. And I've always admired Ghana because they're just so light.
Thank you.
So we have time for one more question. Yes, okay. Benjamin in back. And then I guess we'll get to you next.
So, question about political parties in Ghana.
Okay.
The United States can take a few ask those questions about voters, you can get a sense for what those voters, which side those voters are on. So if you're from this race or this region or this religious group, those are pretty good predictors for which party someone will be in. Do you find those sorts of factors in Ghana, or do parties unify around something?
And
Excellent.
then we'll take the second question
Okay.
too.
Okay.
Yes, in your name, major.
I'm Zane, International Studies.
Mm.
I just had a question about the idea of social capital.
Mhm.
I noticed you mentioned
Robert.
religion and the church is one way the U.S. can develop this social capital, but also that Putnam pointed out that we're seeing a decline sort of in this trend, and how you kind of reconcile or saw that impacting the future of how religion is going to affect electoral politics.
That's an excellent question. So I'll take the first question, which has to do with political affiliation and alignment. So yes, so the Constitution and Political Party Bill says that political parties should not play the ethnic or religious card. In other words, if you are a candidate vying for vote, please don't go and tell people that I'm a Christian, so vote for me, or I'm a Muslim, so vote for me, or these other people, they are terrible guys, they are terrorists, or they, those kind of things. So that is it. Nevertheless, politicians cannot stop playing those cards. They sometimes do it subtly. So if you consistently observe the support base of the two major parties, that is the NPP and the NDC, it is very clear that the NPP tend to be pro-Akan, right? Pro-Akan. And then the NDC tend to be pro-other ethnic groups. And they systematically make special appeal to those support bases. It's there, and the numbers are there, and everybody knows it. But religious leaders have been very, 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 careful. And so whenever a politician makes that kind of appeal, many Ghanaians frown on the Ghanaians don't like that thing at all, to say vote for me because I'm from here, or Ghanaians frown on it. But political parties play that card, and religious leaders are very quick to step in and to call those people to order. So there is what we call name and shame them. So if you're a politician, you play the card, they will name you and shame you and ask you to appeal, to apologize to Ghanaians. So basically that is it. With respect to the social capital issue, that is really a very difficult question, because Putnam and other experts of social capital have, there is a consensus that once social capital declines or disappears, it's very difficult to build it again. Nevertheless, Putnam's argument is very controversial and debatable. How did he measure social capital? He measured it in terms of participation, membership in associations. And he said, look at this church group. In the 60s, there were so many people, 70%, 80%. Today it's about 2%, so there is that decline. Look at this association, Fraterna and, Materna, association, the veteran association, all those different associations. Let's look at the membership. This is it. In the 70s, they were very high. Today it's declined. And because of that, social capital has disappeared. Now, the criticism is that, Putnam overly focused on established association. And what is happening is that social capital hasn't declined in America, but different patterns and forms of social capital have emerged, which is that today people are using social media rather than going to churches. People still pay their dues and those kind of things. So that is where the debate is. So depending on where you stand, if you believe in straight measurement based on associations, then you have a point. But those who believe that social capital, the social network, the Twitter, the WhatsApp, and Facebook, people are doing Facebooking and those kind of things, are also ways which build social capital. But here is it. Putnam say, no, that kind of social capital is fake. It's fake because social capital is established through face-to-face contact, not Facebook and Twitter and those kind of things. It's when you meet the person, you talk to the person, you shake the person, you get to know the person more and more and more. That is where social capital comes in, and not the Facebook one. Nevertheless, whichever way as to whether social capital is declined or not, clearly when it comes to membership in churches, I mean, it's unbelievable. Today in North America, in America, even in the UK, church buildings have been turned into residential and cinema and those kind of things. People are no longer going to church. I was in Claremont, which is in California. Presbyterian Church at its heydays in the 50s and 60s used to have 1,600 membership, and it was mostly full. Today, if you go there, less than 100 people, and mostly old people. The young people cannot be found. And a lot of the churches have been converted into cinema halls and so on. And when you talk to many young people, they say they are Sunday, they go to beach and go to, a picnic and do all those kind of things. That should be an issue of concern in the US, because if social capital is measured by, going to church regularly, meeting people, interacting, cooperating, and that leads to, bigger values and so on and so forth, then America actually has a problem. And that's what Putnam is saying, that American democracy is being endangered. And he touched a lot of nerve when he published that book. Contrary, back home in Ghana, many evangelicals, powerful, evangelicals in America have acknowledged that the global revival of religion is actually taking place in Africa. When they go to Africa, they are amazed about church attendance, about revival. When they hold crusade, it's amazing. So they argue that if social capital built through church is anything to go by, then Africa is doing great. On the other hand, today, in the 50s and 60s and the 15th, 16th, 17th century, it was missionaries from the West who came to preach the gospel and convert people. Today, it is missionaries from Africa, especially Ghana, who are now in the West, and doing great and awesome things. So maybe we want to see more about it, and hopefully social capital will be restored. If you are an institutionalist, then you begin to think about recreating, spaces, because in the US also Putnam demonstrate clearly that even playgrounds and space where people use to meet and interact and build social capital are being converted into restaurants and something else. So people don't even have the space to meet and catch a coffee or drink and so on and so forth. So the social capital dimension is really very tricky. But then also I need to state that it is not only social capital that drives democracy. There are other factors that help democracy to be consolidated. So you may not be doing one well, but the other one, you can be doing great. Thank you.
Well, thank you for spending your early evening with us, and I thank everyone for being here, and have a
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.